And so now, without further ado, I would like to quickly introduce two people who truly need no full introduction. And so for the sake of time, I ask that you do look up their biographies to see the immense work that they have been doing. But we're going to dive in so we can have plenty of questions and discussion along the way. So with no further ado, I present to everyone the Honorable Renee Tolliver and Miss Opal Lee.
Hello, young people.
Hello.
You got to remember you are all young people if you're not 96.
Fair enough, Miss Opal, fair enough. And thank you both for being here.
Thank you for this opportunity, Ashley. It's always a pleasure for me to get to do something with my granny and to also get to introduce her to people who don't know what an amazing woman she is. So.
Yes, thank you both. And so let's dive in. Now I'm going to follow you all's lead. Of course, we have questions prepared, but something may move the spirit and I will go where the spirit leads. And I hope you go along with me. So of course, the movie Till is an emotional depiction of just the strength, the courage, and the torment that Mamie Till went through after the lynching of her son, Emmett. Why do you think movies like this, even though they can be somewhat traumatic, are important for us to view and take part in? And Miss Opal, actually Judge Tolliver, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, it sounds trite to say, but if we don't remember our history, recall our history, then we're doomed to repeat it. And I mean, in this day and age, with all that's going on, it's so important that we not forget how far we've come, first of all, which we've come a long way, but how we got to those dark places so that we don't repeat those things again. And I think, you know, it's important to note that while it might be traumatic to Black individuals, it's traumatic to white individuals, it's traumatic to human beings because we are human beings and it's something that we never want to be accepted as a part of our humanity. So we just have to know, we can't hide from it. We have to know.
And our history says that we haven't past that stage yet. It could happen again. According to the administrations we have, good, bad, indifferent, the kind of climate that that could happen, it could happen again. So we have to be vigilant. We don't want our children not to be aware of our history. They've got to be aware of our history. And I guess at some point, because it happened to me, you have to cram it down their throats. They aren't interested in history, but we've got to give it to them one way or another. And I truly believe, traumatic, if you want to call it that, but the things that can happen to them right now are traumatic. And they don't have to happen if they are told or shown what happened before.
I love that. I'm a former educator, and actually yesterday I was talking to my younger niece about these types of things and why it's still very important for us to review our history because we're not really that far removed anymore. But what is your response to individuals, especially white individuals, who may say, well, you're just showing these movies, you're just creating these experiences to make white people feel bad for something they weren't alive for or that they knew nothing about? What's your response to that, Miss Opal?
I would say history lets us know that we can't deny what's happened. And if we don't learn from it, we're derelict. I believe we must teach not only our children, but the others. They don't need to be afraid or fearful or whatever else. They need to learn and be sure that we get to work together. And I'm thinking it's going to take all of us to make freedom for everybody.
You know, one of the things you always say is that, you know, if people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And every time you say that, I think about the fact that, you know, nobody's born, no matter what race they are, disliking other people or having animus toward other people. That is learned, and it's learned often, most times in the most subtle ways. And people don't even realize that they're passing down some of the more subtleties of racism and hate. And I think it just matters so much if you remind everyone, you know, hopefully people will be so appalled they'll do something positive. They won't want to go back. I mean, because the realism is that if you don't do anything, then you pretty much condone hate. And so we need to get upset about what's happened, so that when, you know, we don't become desensitized to, you know, what's continuing to happen today. Because, you know, none of this has ever stopped. That's the reality of it. I mean, Emmett Till was a very public example of it. But, you know, these things continued. I mean, the difference today is that everywhere somebody's got a video. Otherwise, you know, it would be he said, she said. All these awful things would continue to happen. And I'm not saying that they, you know, everybody who's white is hateful. Of course not. Everybody who's Black is, you know, a troublemaker. Of course not. But if we ignore what happened in the past and don't even think about how it came to be, then it's scary to me that, you know, grandfathers or great-grandfathers might have passed down little nuggets of hate to children who otherwise wouldn't be hating. And, you know, again, it's painful, but I think we can't hide our heads in the sand, stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it didn't exist.
So I'm going to keep on telling people, as many that'll listen, that we can change this. And it's left up to us to change people. Their minds can be changed. And we know people who aren't on the same page we are on. Change their minds. If people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And it's up to us to do that. And it ain't gonna happen in a day. You're gonna have to work at it. But I have the utmost feeling that we can change people's minds and therefore change this nation that could change the world.
I love that. And I think when we think about this piece of like nuggets being passed down from family, and then Judge Tolliver, you also kind of brought up social media and this transparency we have, which I do want to discuss a little bit later. But how do we make sure that the level of transparency that we have is actually helping us and not hurting us when we're really trying to make that change? What are your thoughts on that, Judge?
I mean, I don't see how being open and honest hurts us. First of all, I mean, everything that's done in the dark eventually comes to the light. Again, it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant, but it's real. It is. And that's the thing. And I think about the generations, the younger generations of today. I have a 22-year-old, you know, he learned so much from media. You know, he gets his world from media, and so do his classmates, and so do his friends. And so it's an opportunity, I think, to teach more than anything. It's an opportunity. And, you know, it's a historical account that really is there for the world to see and can't be changed. That's why it's so powerful. That's why it's so powerful. And, you know, from a legal perspective, that's why it's becoming so important. when these issues come up in court, I think. Even the Fifth Circuit. I mean, we've seen the video, we reviewed the video, and this is what we think about this case. It is important. And it's important evidence, and it's an important tool for learning.
Ms. Opal, anything to add there?
Not really.
Thank you. Now, I do want to jump back to the movie a little bit. And we have this scene where Mamie is preparing herself to send her baby boy off to Mississippi from Chicago to a different world. And she has what we refer to as the talk, and tells him, when you're there, the rules are different for Black people in Mississippi. You can't look at, you can't talk to, you can't act any kind of way around white people. Ms. Opal, did you ever receive that type of talk? And if you did, what did it sound like? What was that like?
I'm here to tell you that I never received it because I guess I was insulated. Marshall, Texas, where I was born, I don't even remember seeing a white person or knowing what a white person was, except for the L.B. Price man who came in his automobile with cookwares and clothing and whatever to sell. That man, I guess, was white. And at the end of our street was a grocery store called Moranto's grocery store. Those people didn't look white. So I was insulated. I didn't actually know what white people were like until I got to Fort Worth, Texas. And I was 9 or 10 years old by that time. I didn't go to school with them. I saw them in passing, and they just never were a part of my world.
And, and we were talking about it. I mean, decades later, that was my experience as well. I mean, neighborhoods were segregated, schools were segregated. And, and so I saw people from my community and my church and whatever. And I went to segregated schools. I went to Howard, which, is a historically Black university. I left Fort Worth. And so I really didn't have an opportunity to get to know or be around folks who were white or other than Black until I was in law school. And I mean, that it's a shame in a way, but it's the reality of it. And I was telling my grandma, her mother used to take us downtown to the store, especially around the holiday time. I never knew that there were white and Black fountains, but when I look back on it was during those years when they had colored and white fountains that she was taking us there. But I think she made sure that we didn't really see it or observe it. And I was talking to my mother last night, and she said, and she's between us, obviously, that, nobody ever told her either, but they modeled it for her. Like her grandmother, Opal's mother, would drink from the colored fountain. And so she and her brothers would drink from the colored fountain. And so it wasn't, it was just a part of learning, sort of back to, people don't learn to, people learn to hate. Sometimes it's never really like a formal lesson. It's sort of how the things are. What do you say in front of a person? What do you show a person? And so it's just more subtle than that, but still, powerful. I mean, and even with my 22-year-old, I didn't have the talk. But again, he's got me. He's learning, and we're discussing things he sees in the news. He's going to school, just a matter of economics. Only Black person or one of two Black people. Right. That's what he knows. But then he hears and he sees things and he asks questions about it. And I encourage him to ask questions about it. And that's how he knows that it's a different world for him in certain respects. And he understands it. And it's just a reality, a sad one, but it is. But no formal talk is what I mean.
And I think as parents, we should expose our children to the history of to our history. We just let think that their world and their stories and books and things are all there is. They've got to learn what happened, what history is like, because it could happen again.
And you know, I ask you, did you tell your boys, my uncles, about Emmett Till? I mean, you lived that.
No,
you know, why would you tell them about that?
I didn't. I don't know whether it was the fact that I was working trying to keep us all alive, and we never had the conversations. And if they learned about it, I'm not the person who told them about it.
But the thing too is that they're growing up here in the South. And so they're learning from their environment about what they can and what they can't do. Unlike Emmett, who's, you know, in a relatively freer society. And I say relative because I'm thinking back to the scene at the beginning where his mother is confronted in the store. But he's growing up, or has grown up, you know, as far as he got in his young life, in a relatively freer environment. And so I'm sure Mamie didn't want to tell him, oh, this is all going on down in the South. But you know, she knew what he was going to be facing, and she knew he had no experience with it. And I can imagine how fearful she must have been, knowing what she knew about that situation, and that he didn't know how to handle it and wouldn't know how to handle it because of his upbringing.
And I'm thinking if I had been in that same situation, I never would have let mine go back. I simply would not have let my boys go back down there.
But you know, that's not unusual. You and I have both read the book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, who happened to be one of my Howard classmates. So I knew her before she was a Pulitzer Prize winner. But and in Cast, and she talks about the migration of Blacks from the South, looking for opportunities and escaping racism, and going north, going west, going Midwest. And the fact that those people, because their families remained in the South, would send their children, and they'd be apprehensive just like Mamie, but that's where your family is. And so in the summer, they would send their children and be worried the entire time, just like Mamie was, you know.
And my mom sent us to her family in Arkansas from Marshall. We didn't have no problems because the whites in that neighborhood were just like the Blacks in the neighborhood. They'd come to our grandparents, you know, a meal, a flower, or a tool, and it was a family. We didn't know there was a difference. We didn't.
Well, that's what happens when people are neighbors and people don't think hate. And you know that, and it shows the economics of it. I mean, these are farmer people, these are farmers, you know, this is rural farming area, and you know, everybody's trying to make a living. But when, you know, your thought is, I'm being held down economically and I need to rise up by pulling someone else down, or keeping someone else down, or showing dominance over somebody, and this is how these things happen. I mean, because in the movie, these people's livelihood depended on Black people. And I read later that the store never did recover. You know, I mean, I guess it was the first unofficial Black boycott, maybe, because they stopped going to the store. And so these people lost their store and their livelihood, but they couldn't see past, you know, we're poor people too. We're going to keep down these other people so we can feel superior, so we can be superior. And then there's just the whole mob mentality of it, I think, you know, because there's some of it in the movie when you say where they're, you know, the people are cheering them on and the brother-in-law gets involved and other people to make this come about. It took 3 days before they came to get him. You know, imagine what kind of conversations, you know, those men were having.
And what bothers me is that there were Blacks who were involved in what they did to this child. I can't get rid of it.
Yeah, was some of that due to just the fear of getting, you know, themselves in trouble if they did not help? Why was it that they felt the need to take part in such a terrible act of like brutalization?
Because as that man said, if he didn't sacrifice this child, his whole family was going to be mobbed and hurt.
The uncle.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was the mentality he had.
What about the men in the truck, though?
But those are the ones I'm talking about.
Mhm.
They've been following them folk and doing what these folk told them to do their whole lives, you know? And so it was not unnatural for them to do what they did with that child. And who knows how many others they had done like that and helped with. You don't know.
Well, I can't imagine them in that situation refusing it. Even the witness, the eyewitness to him, hearing him being beaten and seeing his body come out. I mean, the fear that was there. I saw a longer sort of documentary type show on this, and they went into that more about how fearful the people were. And so that was pervasive in the entire town, and even the town was segregated because, the town where they stayed, where Mamie stayed and her father with the doctor, was,
different.
So different, and African-Americans thriving and whatever. And then over in this place where they had to live, where, whites were in charge, it was a whole different, just a whole different atmosphere, attitude, everything, just because of the nature of it.
Yeah. And so you mentioned this already, Judge Tolliver, but Ms. Opal, you lived these moments. You saw the immediate aftermath of Emmett Till's lynching. You saw the photos when Mamie was very adamant that her son was exposed, uncovered, and shown to the entire world. What was that like for you, seeing that back then?
My thought was, this isn't going to happen to my boys. I'm not going to let it happen. I didn't feel that where I lived, the people were animals like that. I knew whites. I knew the stores we went to where we had the black fountains, the white fountains, and the restrooms were different, and we couldn't try on the clothes or the shoes if we wanted to buy them. I guess, hey, I'm used to this, but my boys are going to stay close to my neighborhood. I'm going to keep them close. I'm not going to let these things happen to them.
Which I'm sure is what Mamie thought too.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's just so frightening. And, even today, I mean, I worry. I tell my son, you've got to be diligent. You have to be aware. You have to know who you're around. And I think about people like Bird and Jasper. He gets dragged here in Texas behind a truck with, chained up, until he's dead and his body parts are lying all over. But the men who did it were his friends. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. I mean, you can't let your guard down. And that's I think true. That's the scariest part.
It is, because Mamie let hers down. She knew what it was like in Mississippi, but she let her guard down. I said, let my child go down there. It's going to be all right. My folks going to show him what to do. But she was apprehensive. Oh, she was apprehensive. She knew better.
Yeah. And talking about you living history. I mean, the strength that you had to try to change things, even here and even in, it's maybe relatively better than Mississippi, is amazing to me. I mean, I don't know if you'll tell them about your first poll tax, for example. I mean, that's just a story that just floors me when you tell it.
Well, we had to pay poll tax before you could vote. Now, I only got $1.75, and I got to make up my mind whether I am going to get a poll tax, if I am going to buy some food for my children. And I made the decision to pay the poll tax. my children didn't suffer, but they could have. If I hadn't had a mother who was going to support me, they would have gone hungry. Huh?
Mm-hmm. And when I say that you were brave, I know that after that you protested in Texas against poll taxes. Yeah. I mean, you didn't just sit and say, this is, a horrible thing that I have to do. You said, let's do something about it. And that's what amazes me about Mamie's spirit. Mm-hmm. She could have just grieved, and who wouldn't have grieved the loss of her only son? I mean, when that actress sobbed over that boy's body, I lost it. And but that she did something about it mm-hmm. is amazing. Mm-hmm. And that she did something about it, was amazing.
And my experience is that most Black mothers will do something. They're like lion cubs or tigers. They don't just let you come and get their kids and mess over them. They go fight back. It might not be what you think, but they go. I remember my grandmother going to a school with an apron on because I think I had sent my child to a Catholic school because I was working 2 or 3 jobs and I couldn't take care of her properly, see after her. And so somebody in the school, in the office, had decided the reason she was going to school was they took her out because she was pregnant. Oh, when my grandma heard that, she went to school. She was going to eat that lady alive. They had to back her off of that, not her grandchild, and there's something you're saying. But I've not had to do it myself, but I've seen the fierceness with which my mother, protected her children. I've seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. You want the best for them. You're fearful for them all the time. And mm-hmm. I know everybody who's, here today, who's a parent can attest to that. And it's just unfathomable, that something like this would happen. But, it did happen. And, it didn't happen in a vacuum. And this is not like such a rare occasion. I don't know if you know about the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. Mm-hmm. We went to that this past summer and made a day trip of the museum and the lynching memorial. And I mean, when you stand there and see all the metal hanging down with all the names and how much there is, it's flooring. And I was telling one of the court security officers just today that we saw Till together and what was going to be happening with this conversation today. And she said, well, Judge, my great-grandfather was lynched in Arkansas. And she sent never met him. He lynched in 1902. But she says her family, it still impacts them. It still impacts them. And so this is not something that's, Hollywood and made up. This is life people had to live. And that's why it's so important to get it out there and let everybody see it.
And closer to home than that, here in Fort Worth, Main Street that goes through the town, there's a building called 1012 North Main Street. Huge building. It was erected by the Ku Klux Klan. And so a group, and I'm a part of that group, we've acquired that building and we're going to make it something positive. There are several little nonprofits that are going to do that. You just can't not be aware and do something. I've heard of a phrase, do something if it's wrong, but do something. And
the man who was lynched.
Yes, the man who was lynched, hadn't done absolutely nothing. They're packing houses, and he crossed the picket line. They must have beat him unmercifully and left him for dead. When they took him to the hospital, they drug him out of there and lynched him. Name was Fred Rouse. And so this center is the Fred Rouse Healing and something Center,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that's the response.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, the lynching memorial in Montgomery, making this building that is associated, with negative things into something positive. I think it speaks a lot to what Mamie said in that funeral home in the movie, when she said, that's how he liked to be seen, go get his black suit. And the funeral home director said, he's in no shape to be seen. And she said, oh no, he's in exactly the right shape. They have to see what they have done to my child. And we're taking now these negative things and putting it on display, making the lynching memorial to make people aware. Because if we don't, all of this gets pushed by the wayside and swept underneath the rug with nothing else to happen.
That's true. That's true.
And as a follow-up to that, we have these Black traumas, but we also kind of see in the media, and Mamie dealt with this, where the media was ignoring her tragedy and instead making her out to be a Jezebel, talking about the number of husbands that she had, all of the negative aspects associated with her and ignoring her trauma. And we see that today. Why do you think the media tends to overly scrutinize Black individuals, whether they're the victim or not, more so than their white counterparts, instead of focusing on what they actually endured?
It sells papers.
Exactly what I was thinking. I mean, it's all about making money.
Yeah.
And the more sensational, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And the story falls off the front page unless you can add something salacious to pull it back on the front page and get it back into people's minds. And again, sell papers. It's just the way it is.
And how do we stop that? How do we combat that? Or can we?
I'm not sure we can, unless, of course, there are things that we can do that are opposite of that, if we've helped a family and shown how they've grown or have arrived, or we can see where we got together and rebuild a church, or if we do something positive, see positive things going on. I don't turn on the television in this day and age, except for one story I like, because the news is too negative. I don't want to see that stuff. Yeah. And so I like Blue Bloods. And that's the only thing I tell.
That's why I'm laughing, because I knew that was the one show.
One show.
See anything else? No.
And I have no clue why, but
I don't either.
This is the case.
I've just been introduced to Abbott Elementary, that I think is as cute as it can be, but I hadn't heard of Abbott until recently.
Mm-hmm. And Ashley, to follow up on your follow-up question, I think that Opal is right, that we, to combat the negative is to accentuate the positive. And that's all we can do, is to remind people, this person was a victim, and how, speak out and say how horrible it is that you would victimize a victim, in this way, especially if it has, whatever that the negative thing is, has absolutely nothing to do with them becoming a victim. And, as society changes things as we go along, I mean, I'm thinking about, shield laws for rape victims and children who are victims of sexual abuse and others, that we didn't have all the time. And back in Emmett Till's time, we didn't have either. Just bringing it around to, what we do in the legal system. But, enough people cried out about it, that it became law in pretty much every jurisdiction, that we just victimize survivors of sexual assault in that way, no matter, what the negative is. And so hopefully, as time goes on, I mean, you can see society changing. I'm looking at, the mass shootings that have become almost a part of every day. And, hopefully we won't be so desensitized to that, we don't realize it. I'm looking at that and the fact that media outlets, because of pressure, are now not naming and giving glory in a way to those people who commit those crimes. So we're not going to talk about them. We're not going to say their names. And so it's society, I think, that moves the media to a place where, they're better reflective of society and society's values. And so hopefully that will happen as far as this goes too. But right now, it's just about money, I think.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I also want to go back to something you said earlier, Miss Opal, about the uncle and how he said, Mamie got upset. She asked him, did you have a gun that night? And he said, I had to pick because I have to live here. And when those men came to my door, I wouldn't have just been fighting those men at my door. I would have been fighting every white man who did not want a Negro to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the 1950s. But even now, we still have people who have those same sentiments. But I want to ask, for those that are allies on this call, for people who are not African Americans, who are white counterparts, what is your advice to them on how they can help be a part of the solution so that we can help hopefully get rid of those sentiments in the Black community?
Well, it's going to take a while, and it comes down to the economy. We need jobs that are going to pay us monies that we can feed our families, have a decent place to stay, have transportation. And we don't have that. We're struggling from payday to payday to meet the bills, And so what's to keep those who have from building a factory and paying a wage where people can survive? I think we're going to have to come to that. There are Black people with money as well as white people. So let's take some of that wealth. And yet we're not willing to share that wealth. I tell you, but bring the wealth before some of this subsides.
I think that the example you give when you talk about the uncle and, how he was afraid of what would happen to his own family. I think a lot of folks, good folks, many, many good folks, more good folks definitely than bad folks by great margins, are quiet in that way too. And not quiet because they think they're going to be subjected to violence, although they could be, depending. Quiet because it's easier to go along, get along, or just, I'd never do that quietly, than to speak out. Because speaking out and taking action is not fun. It subjects you to all kinds of ridicule and, and possible retribution. And so, it takes a bunch of bravery to subtle signs of someone, doing something racist or, hurting someone because of racism and to or to try to intervene and remove that person from the situation. I mean, it's our human nature, our human instinct to try to protect ourselves and protect our families. And so to go that extra step to try to protect another human being at the risk of yourself or your family or your station is just bravery that
we haven't acquired.
Most folks
we've
have,
not been taught. We don't have
human.
the instinct.
We're human.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, it's just not our
self-preservation. Point me getting out there with you because I got to look after my own.
Mm-hmm. But that's what we do. I mean, that's what we can do, all of us, no matter what our race, no matter what our circumstance, is to be brave in that way. We were talking last night about how, with some of the police shootings or, of Black people that were in the news and, sparked protests, that, how good it felt to see white folks on the front lines of those protests, being brave and being supportive in a very visible way. You can't help but feel good about that and think how we've changed since Emmett Till and how positive that is,
And it's getting better all the time. I know when there was an incident that happened to my family when I was about 9, my family moved here to Fort Worth, and my parents bought a house in a neighborhood where we weren't wanted, and we didn't know. Hey, the man sold my parents the house. We moved in. My mom had it fixed up so nice on the 19th of June. And those people started gathering, and the newspaper says there were 500 of them, and the police were there, but they couldn't control the mob, the paper said. When my dad came with a gun, the police told him, if you bust a cap, we'll let these people have you. My parents sent us to friends several blocks away, and they left under cover of darkness. Those people tore that place asunder. They drug the furniture out and burned it and did all kinds of despicable things. Our parents never, ever discussed it with us. Never, ever. But they bought another house. They didn't stop. They didn't let it defeat them. Yeah.
And your mother's was a housekeeper for a white family, and the doctor who was the head of that family helped. I remember her saying helped them get another house.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. She's walking history. I'm telling you. She told me a story last night. About a prominent Fort Worth attorney, D. Kelly, who since passed away, that I had never heard before, and it just blew me away. You remember what you told me about that?
Yeah. Hello. Attorney Kelly took me to lunch at one of the leading department stores. We had lunch, good time, talked, went on our way. But you see, a Black person wasn't supposed to have lunch in that store. How about that?
Wow.
No incident.
Because what are they going to say to him, right?
Right.
I mean, he's, a leading citizen of Fort Worth. They're not going to say a thing to him.
They didn't.
And they didn't. And I laughed when she told me, because she said, I guess we integrated it that day. We integrated that lunch counter or tea room. It was a tea room. Integrated that tea room, don't know what happened after that, but just a little thing like that,
Mm-hmm.
But I guess at the same time, Judge Tolliver, when we think about lawyers, right, even today, what responsibility do we have as lawyers, those that are judges, to help really provide a solution so we can move the needle forward in the area of equality and justice? What's our responsibility?
Our responsibility is just that, to make sure justice is done, and I was a prosecutor for decades, and people would say, you just go after people or whatever. No, the prosecutor's job is to seek justice. And as long as all prosecutors are doing that, they're a part of the solution. As long as all defense attorneys are doing their part, they're a part of the solution. As long as all judges are we're doing our parts, we're a part of the solution, no matter what our role is in that system. And I was reading a New York Times article about the judge in the Emmett Till case, because you just assume it looks like a circus, and but I mean, he was making some rulings that surprisingly were enlightened. For example, I mean, you heard, and I can't think of the lady's name, who was the accuser. And she died recently, and that's why the article was out there. But he kept out and said it was irrelevant about what had happened at the store. He dismissed the jury, and people don't realize that, but it depicted it in the movie that, although that came out and that testimony is a part of the record, it was not put in front of the jury. Man, it had to be hard for him in that community, being a judge, and to say, no, this is not relevant. The conclusion was foregone. Mamie even demonstrates that by saying, I'm ready to go. We know what's going to happen. But, that he would take a stand like that as a jurist, and it was the right one, but to publicly do it in that community where he had to live and he had to serve was brave, was good. So, we all have a job to do as lawyers, as judges, and if we do it in the way that the Constitution means it to be done, then we're a part of the solution and not a part of the problem.
I appreciate that. And of course, in this role, I'm new, I'm only 5 years in, but I also have the ability, to see what's happening and be that change. And so that's incredibly powerful to say, to even see back then, people did do the right thing, even though our history sometimes suggests that the white jurists and the judges and things were completely against us. So it is powerful to see that example. Now, we also know that around the time of Emmett's lynching, that federal anti-lynching legislation was really already being discussed. And we're talking about 1950, in the 1950s, but it did not become law until 2022. Ms. Opal, what took them so long?
I got no idea, because people kept on being lynched. People kept on getting on the wrong side of the law. And the law, in some instances, were doing the wrong things. So we still had the NAACP and other groups that plotted and talked and went ahead trying to get things done. They didn't stop. It just took justice, what is it said, grind slowly. But it did finally get done.
Yeah. It's sad that it took so long, but you have to celebrate it. That's the same thing. People don't know that they had introduced bills to make Juneteenth a national holiday back in the 70s. And it, feels like in 21, when they're finally signing the bill on June 17th, it just happened, but it didn't.
No.
That's how it happens. That's how major change like this happens. And it just takes us being persistent, vigilant. I think, vigilant, a good word. And, just not giving up. Because that's the only way it ever happens. And think about what was happening in 2021 and 22. So then why would Congress be more responsive to it? Because basically, the things were happening that were very public, but we had video and people saw it. And that was the whole point of of Mamie showing her son, let's shine a light on this, and Martin Luther King and the nonviolent approach to making change through civil rights protests. Let's let the cameras catch them sicking the dogs on the kids, spraying them with the fire hoses, beating people who are trying to march peacefully, because until we're all shocked by it, we're all appalled by it, no change happens. But when we are, change happens. And so I don't think it's any coincidence that in 22, based on what had been happening in 21, that we get a Juneteenth holiday and we get an anti-lynching legislation. It's sad. It means people sacrificed their lives, in some ways, but, vigilance, she said, vigilance.
And how did that feel, Ms. Opal? 2021, you were there with the president whenever Juneteenth finally became a federal holiday. How did that feel?
I was humbled by being in the presence of the President of the United States. I was so amazed. I told the kids, I wanted to do a holy dance, but they told me not to because they say I'm twerking. So I didn't do it. Shucks. I was a happy camper.
For you, Judge Tolliver, being able to see like what your grandmother worked so hard for just truly, truly come to fruition. What was that like for you?
You know, it was amazing. And I was at work, and a couple of the deputy clerks were in my chambers with me, and we watched it on our phones together. And I just can't even tell you how amazing it is. But I've known her to be amazing all my life. And the best thing about all of this happening is that other people get to see. I mean, you know, I've known the stories of her going to the Fort Worth School Board and protesting in the 40s because the kids were given the torn up books in the segregated schools that came from the white schools and couldn't get, you know, even good textbooks. You know, I know about her getting out and protesting. You know, I know about her passing that down in my family. And just to see that other people, I mean, there's just so much about her. She started a food bank. She started a farm to help people get fresh vegetables. You know, I mean, all the things in my life I've seen her do, and it culminated with the passage of the Juneteenth bill in such a public way has been overwhelming for me. And I'm just so glad she gets to see how appreciated she is, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And Miss Opal, your granddaughter made some history herself as well when she became the first African-American magistrate judge here in the Northern District of Texas. How did that make you feel, seeing her reach that?
Oh, listen, if I'd had on a shirt, the buttons would have popped, you know? I'm delighted with her. But she's from a family where people have been doing things. Her great-grandparents, they didn't. Everybody came to my grandfather for advice, for tools, for food. And my mom, my grandfather sent somebody to her, help them get on their feet. It's in the DNA. You have to help. And you're so proud when the ones in your family actually do something that's notable. Oops.
Because y'all know the people, you'll probably get a kick out of this. So at my formal investiture ceremony, she was the person who robed me. Before she was the Opal Lee, she was my grandmother who meant so much. And so she was the person to, you know, formally put the robe on me. And so Judge Fitzwater is up there. He was the chief judge at the time, and he's telling his whatever. And he looks up and he goes, she's already over there putting the robe on me because she knows it's time to do it. And he's talking and she's like, hey, let's get on with this, you know. There's a video of that somewhere.
I need to go find this video. I love that. Such a precious moment. Now, I do have a closing question, but before that, for those in attendance, Judy has put the CLE code in the chat, but the number is 174-196-274, and this program is eligible for 1 hour of DEI ethics credit. So before we leave for this afternoon, I do have a closing question for you both. So Mamie famously said, what happens to any of us anywhere in the world had better be the business of us all. And that was her charge for us to truly get out of our bubble, out of our own comfort zone, and fight for other people. Now, Ms. Opal, you have also said, none of us are free until we all are free. What should we be doing to live up to the call that you and Mamie have put before us?
I've said it over and over again, that we should each make ourselves a committee of one to change somebody's mind. We know people who aren't on the same page we're on. Change their minds. And that's not going to be something you can do in a day. But if people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. So let's get about the business of that. We took 1,500,000 signatures to Congress, and we were prepared to take that many more. Don't you know if 3 million people were on the same page, we could turn this country around. And I believe that. I believe it's left up to us. We don't have any guns, but we got sharp minds, and it's left up to us to change the way things are.
Judge Tolliver, last word for you. Judges and lawyers again, how do we make sure we are living up to that same call?
Live up to our lawyer's creed. Have you ever read that and think about that and think about the oath that we take? If we actually live up to our oaths as lawyers, how can we help but make this a better place for every single person? You know, how can we, this is the greatest country in the world. Hands down, no doubt. We were talking about that last night, you know, and it's not a shame to say that it takes us continuing to serve justice and freedom for it to remain the best country in the world. And so we all take an oath that that's what we're going to do, and that's what we should do. And again, when we do it, I mean, our world is a better place.
Thank you both again. I am just incredibly grateful and appreciative to be a part of this moment in history, to make it a family affair between grandmother and granddaughter and have you both share your insights. So I am incredibly humbled by this moment, and I thank you both so much. And I also have to say, Ms. Opal, I am also a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. So this adds an extra special moment for me as well.
Oh, that's great. And Ashley asked me one day how I got to be a Delta and what her reaction was.
So much for joining, and to all of those viewing in, thank you for joining us today. Hope you gained so many nuggets from these two as I did, and you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Ash.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.